And what do I want to get out of this workshop? I want to convey the message of minimal viable products and small pieces of functionality for stores. And we can go this way.
I'm Andrew Bacigalupo. I'm a business analyst on the BI operations squad. My favorite book, at least professionally related, it was my introduction to Agile, called Agile Business by Rally Software Consulting Group. And what I'm looking to get out of this workshop is to learn the various ways of splitting stories the right way. And I know there's no one right way, but to learn some of the different ways of doing so.
My name is Brian Madden. I'm a leader within the IT Quality Assurance organization. My favorite book is Agile Project Management with Scrum. And what I want to get out of this workshop, user stories is one of the areas where I don't have as much knowledge as I'd like. Creation of user stories, the whole art of that. So I'm going to be attending this guild as much as I possibly can to learn more about it.
My name is Richie Freisen. I am QA automation on the shop team for e-commerce. My favorite book, I guess right now, the one I'm reading, it's called Willpower Instinct. And what do I want to get out of this workshop? Well, I want to learn a little bit more about the BA and how QA can integrate more with them.
I am Steve Mueller. I am a BA on the shop team e-commerce. My favorite book is probably Keith Richards' autobiography.
Awesome.
He touches on Agile a little bit. What I want to get out of this, I guess, just to get with different BAs in different departments and see how we interpret the same story in our different ways.
Jenna Martin. I'm a BA. My favorite book is The Alchemist, and what I want to get out of this workshop is just learning more about MVPs and how other areas within the business look at them.
Hey, I'm Samni, and I'm a BA for PCD team. So I like to read a lot of adventurous books, so I like Dan Brown's books a lot. And I expect to learn to solve the BA issues over here and get tried out in my team from this.
I'm Umar. I'm a QA in Ecom. I like more blogs than books. I like sports blogs like Deadspin and Reddit, Tumblr, stuff, some random stuff like that. But I'm here because my career path, I kind of want to transition into a BA, so I'm just picking up stuff and learning as we go.
I'm Kevin Matheny. I'm an Agile coach working with your organization in a variety of different ways. My favorite book is a really hard choice. From a work-related perspective, it's probably The Principles of Product Development Flow by Don Reinertsen, which is either awesome bedtime reading or one of the best books you'll ever read. But it's seriously amazingly good. What I'd like to get out of this workshop is I want to understand more about the current state of the practice here at Bluestem in terms of how you're doing this and how I can help and how I can learn from what you're doing.
All right, I'm Mike Bale. I'm a BA on the customer marketing squad. My favorite book, I just read it last week, was The Lean Startup. It's a good overview of Agile and a startup sense, or startup type company. What I want to get out of this is my third day at Bluestem, so I want to meet a lot of you. That's one thing, but also just try to avoid roadblocks when it comes to story creation and not having that long-lasting debate of is a story too big or too small.
Julie Teresa, BA on the BI Merge Squad. My favorite book, I read a lot of medical fiction, and Robin Cook's Brain is my favorite. Out of this workshop, I'd really like to learn how to split stories and even how to get around to defining stories. I know Kevin has been helping us with that, or he had helped us, but it's challenging, so yes.
So I'm Troy Neese, and I am a BA with the BI Credit Squad. And my favorite book or blog right now, professionally, is the BABBAC, because I'm studying to take the CBAP exam. So that has become my favorite book. Don't know if it's really my favorite book or not. It's become that. And what I'm looking to get out of this workshop is similar to what Julie was saying around stories, how big, how small, how complex, acceptance criteria, etc.
Erin Cradaville. I'm a BA on the econ team, and my favorite book. So I just finished The Martian, and that was really good. But I have to admit, I don't really think I have like a favorite book, or one I can think of right now. And I'm reading all the Harry Potter books for the first time, so that's kind of fun. I am looking to get out of this workshop, just learn other ways to split stories and better ways to do things, and then just to help out people with the stuff that I've been doing.
Anybody on the phone? So we got, yep, go ahead.
This is Abbas Shalil. From this session, I would like to learn how the stories are split and a kind of the BA's perspective on how we can implement Agile moving forward. For me, I cannot talk about books, but I really nowadays reading articles and blogs about Agile and how things are implemented in other places. So it will be a good learning experience for me in this session.
Anastasia and Devya?
This is Vidya Vipu. I'm working as a QA, but then helping out writing stories for a few days now. So I would be learning how to split stories from the session, and I read more blogs than books, so that's all from me.
This is Anastasia. I'm an analyst and I'm helping out with the BA role. My favorite book is Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol, and I just wanted to learn how to break down stories a little bit better.
Cool. Okay.
Great. Go, Paul.
Hello. Yes, I just joined. This is Gopal. I've been with Bluestone for the last 4 years. I work as a BA for collections team. That's all.
Anybody else on the phone? And if you could mute your mic a little bit on the phone, that'd be great too. So we can drown out the background noise.
Thank you.
Awesome. And for those on the phone and on IM, you can see my screen. You can see my mouse in the upper left.
Yes, I can.
Okay. And then my mouse in the lower right now. Great. Okay. Great. You can set it down.
Can I? Okay. Well, I think we should get the awesomeness of Ellen presenting.
Hopefully. So, hi, welcome. Thank you very much for joining. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, just raise your hand or chime in on the phone. Just let me know. Great. So, has anybody here been on a project where they started developing software and they felt like it didn't add any value? So you find the nearest concrete wall, you bang your head against it, and like, nobody's ever going to use this. Anybody?
Yes.
Yes.
Once. Once.
Just once. Just once. Great. Have you ever been on a project where you had a mountain of work and you really didn't know where to start, and you're like, we're never going to finish this. This is too big. We need it a little bit smaller so we can actually get it to production sometime this calendar year?
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. How much do you love releasing your hard work to production? You like celebrate, you're like, yes, finally it's off my plate, and on to the next one, right? So what happens if I told you you could celebrate production releases weekly without the headaches of moving large pieces of functionality to production that didn't have any value? Would you like that? Kind of like that?
Yes.
Yay! Awesome. Well, welcome to Story Splitting Techniques. By using story splitting techniques that we'll learn today, you'll be able to deliver value-added software frequently to production without major headaches of trying to figure out how to get this large piece of functionality to production. So first I'll walk you through some techniques we'll break out into groups and we'll try to utilize those techniques. And at the end of the day, you'll be a master at it. Great. So let's make sure that we're all on the same page here. So the goal for today and every day is to deliver the smallest value-added piece of functionality, aka the MVP. So as business analysts and people that support business analysts, how do we get small pieces of functionality to production? So the whole Agile principle is deliver value-added software frequently, right? So we put something out in the marketplace, we see how it does, and then we improve upon it. And it's a continuous improvement upon what you initially developed. Great. And so to make sure we're all on the same page, let's go over some vocabulary, some nomenclature. So we're going to be using the words theme, epic, story, and task quite a bit. So what's a theme? So a theme is the highest level of story hierarchy. It's basically a couple words. So for example, MPP, Major Purchase Program, Fresh Start 2.0 is a theme. Data integrity is also another theme. So it's basically the reason why you're doing what you're doing. And another term is epics. So you have your theme, and then it's composed of different epics. So what's an epic? So an epic is smaller than a theme, and it's really kind of a major sticking point when we try to figure out how to dissect stories. So the easiest way to figure out whether or not something's an epic or a story is that an epic takes longer than one iteration. Stories can be completed in one iteration, right? So epics and stories both have tangible requirements. They can have test cases written against them, but the sizing is really the key part between the two. So an epic can be like a really big user story. It's also too big to complete an iteration. Yes?
One thing that's worth calling out from what I've observed in working with teams at Bluestem, there are a lot of teams that as they're getting started are having things that are at the story level of definition that are taking more than one sprint to complete.
Mm-hmm.
So it's stories completed in less than a sprint is a great guideline. But if we say that has to be the case, then we start getting people saying, well, then our sprints need to be 3 weeks or 4 weeks long, and that's not the direction we want to go.
So would you change those stories to epics and then break those epics down into smaller stories?
What I've been doing with teams is saying what we need to do is we need to say this is an objective that you're pursuing, and there's tasks. If a story delivering customer business value takes a number of tasks that added up with the environmental challenges and other feedback loop issues that you have is going to take more than 2 weeks of duration, it's still a story.
Okay.
It's just, you might complete half the tasks in the first 2 weeks, and the second half of the tasks, you haven't completed delivering the story, you haven't delivered business value, but you're marching through your environments. Things like if you have to wait for overnight batch cycles or other sorts of things, you can wind up simply with your duration being longer than 2 weeks. It still operates at the conceptual level of story.
So I just want to interject sort of a general disclaimer here, which we did at the last one, and I apologize for not having done that at the top of this meeting. This presentation represents a view. That we're not setting an enterprise direction. Alan is sharing his experience, and you guys can leverage that, right? So this is not in any way, shape, or form saying like, this is how you should go back and now this is how you do it, right? Just, go let Alan share his thoughts, and then if it works, we can talk further about it. But to Kevin's point, like it's, everyone, there's a continuum, right, in this organization, and everyone's in a different place. So let's go forward with Alan's presentation, and if we want to talk further offline, we can totally do that.
So an epic is also comprised of multiple stories. So what is a story? A story is the components of an epic. It is also kind of the base unit in which things are measured against. So you have your themes, your epics, your stories, which is kind of your base unit. And then below that you have smaller granular tasks. And so generally, 6 to 10 stories per iteration would be a really good ballpark to have if you have approximately 2 developers. If you have less than 6 stories, you'll run into issues if there's roadblocks. So say you have 4 developers and 4 stories, right? If one of the stories is blocked by a dependency in a different party, well, you only have 3 stories and 4 developers. What's the 4th developer really doing? So by having many small stories in your iteration, you can delegate appropriately. And so a little bit of background about myself. So out of college, I was a developer. Didn't really like it, so transitioned to a BA role. I was in a company where we did waterfall for a year. I was fine with it. And then Agile came and it was kind of implemented, saying, hey, you have to do this, you have to write user stories, get away from this big business requirements document, and now write these smaller user stories. So we were having problems getting everything done in an iteration. So went to a course about how do you deliver small pieces of functionality, how do you get value-added software out there? And so I came across these story splitting techniques. I was like, oh, this makes a world of difference. I can deliver smaller pieces of functionality to production and kind of eliminate waste. Because all the requirements in the business requirement, yes, they're important, but how many of them actually add value? You can use priorities to derive value, but do we have to deliver all of them instantaneously? So a task, for the sake of this argument, is going to be the components of a story. So it's the smallest piece on the story hierarchy, and it's going to be only big enough for one developer to work on, and it normally takes about a day, at most 2, to work on. Great, and so here is kind of a visual representation of stories, or themes, epics, stories, and tasks, kind of the way that I see them. So say your significant other was like, hey, can you make dinner Wednesday night? And you're like, sure, why not? So you start out with a theme of Wednesday night dinner, right? And so you break it down to appetizers and soups, a main course, and a dessert. And then you break it down even further to appetizers and soups will consist of Caesar salad and tomato soup. And then you break it down even further to what composes a Caesar salad. So we got croutons, red onions, dressing, and lettuce. Does anybody here not like onions? Okay. So would you prioritize those pretty low, pretty high?
Low.
Low, right? You might even call it wasteful.
Yeah.
So in the waterfall world, if we were at the epic level and we did appetizers, soups, main course, and dessert, really the stakeholder doesn't have visibility into these smaller tasks. And so now that we've broken it down into these individual tasks, the stakeholder, or Aaron, could go, yeah, red onions kick rocks. I don't really want those. Right? And so now we're eliminating waste. So the Caesar salad is to her liking. And so now we only have really value-added ingredients in our Caesar salad. Great. Any questions or clarifications on the terminology?
I want to know where the anchovies are.
I don't know how you get this extravagant meal. I got hot dogs and pork meat. Okay.
So you got a sandwich?
No, not a sandwich.
Hot dogs are not sandwiches.
No.
But Alan, just to expand on your thought, I mean, we wouldn't, in Waterfall, we wouldn't figure out that she doesn't like red onions until after we've already created the entire meal. In this case, we're figuring that out after we've created the Caesar salad, right? That's the whole point.
And also with tasks, you can kind of, I know that I'm stretching this analogy, but if you had 4 chefs in the kitchen, you could have one chopping lettuce, one getting the dressing, one chopping the red onions, and one getting the croutons, right? So that way you can kind of delegate it a little bit. Cool. Any questions, comments, concerns so far? Great. Now, why should we even split stories in the first place? why is it kind of important? So, in my opinion, one of the benefits is emphasis on value and priority and less waste. We saw in the previous example, Aaron, Steve, Umar didn't like red onions, right? And so we're eliminating that small piece of functionality, so we're eliminating waste. And therefore, we can prioritize smaller pieces of functionality ahead of the red onions that nobody likes. Another benefit is using multiple resources and reducing bottlenecks. So if you, again, if you have 4 developers and 4 stories, if one of those stories is blocked based on a dependency on a different group, you can, with smaller, multiple smaller stories, you can shuffle that work around. So people are constantly busy or have work on their plate. And yet another benefit is focused team. So do you guys know how to run a marathon? You put one foot in front of the other, right? And so if you continuously put your foot in front of the other, you're going to finish that marathon, right? And so people really get bogged, well, developers in QA kind of get bogged down if you tell them a huge story. If you shrink it down to its basic components, people don't get confused. One of my favorite benefits is kind of fresh stories. So if you have smaller stories, instead of updating a gigantic story with all of the changes and requirements, you can just take those smaller tasks and make those updates. And so you don't have to go through the entire backlog and update the story there. My favorite benefit is migrating faster and almost instant gratification for everybody. What really gets me going is the fact that I can see the work done every week or every 2 weeks. I really hated working on something for 6 months and really not seeing anything out of it. Really makes me happy whenever I write a story and then 2 weeks later I actually can see it. It'll also make your developers happy because they'll understand the stories better. They'll understand the small, minimal viable product that you're trying to deliver. QA makes their writing test cases a lot easier. And your business stakeholders, they can see the progress that you're making very rapidly.
Actually, on the QA side too, a story that takes 9 business days out of 10 in the sprint is much less likely to get done because if the development takes 9 days, you have 1 day to test. If you find anything, essentially that story isn't getting it done by the end of the sprint. Smaller stories means earlier delivery to the testing phase and the UAT phase if you have one, and much more likely that more of those stories will get done by the end of the sprint. So, good.
Anybody else have any other benefits that they have seen by kind of using smaller stories? That's great.
I just think they're easier to write.
Yeah.
I think it's easier to write a smaller story than to write 10 smaller stories versus one gigantic story.
So it's easier to test.
So, if you all have the handout called Splitting User Stories cheat sheet.
So read that one.
It's the single loose leaf form. Aaron does not have it.
It's all good. I'll pull it up my computer.
Here, Aaron.
Oh, not the,
No,
not the
not
web.
this one.
Not the
This
web.
one.
Not the web.
Oh, here we go. This one?
Yeah, it's good. It's all good. It's all good. We'll just share.
Splitting user stories, not how to split a user story. Totally different thing.
It's the one with the piece of cake
Here you go.
on the top. Everybody on the phone still with me so far? Yes. Gopal?
Yes.
Gopal? Anastasia?
Yes,
Yep. Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
All right.
Awesome. Great. Let's do it. Awesome. So I'll walk you through some of the stories that I've kind of encountered in my daily business as a business analyst and how I've split stories up or kind of I've seen kind of in the workplace. So if the story is ship package to user, is there a logical beginning, middle, and end in which you can split the stories up into? So shipping a package to the user, what does that mean? So it means packing the box, it means associating a tracking number with a box, and then it means putting the box on a truck, right? And so if we had a larger story called shipping package to user, now we can split it up into smaller components via work, because there's a logical beginning, middle, and end. And you can even break down even further if there were other tasks that you saw fit in there. Any questions on workflow?
There's a kind of an important piece of this is that each one of those creates value. You don't ship the package to the user until the end, and so it's one of the things that's tempting to think that you're not done with it until you put it on the truck. But each one of the tasks adds a discrete amount of business value and is measurable and deliverable. You could make changes to the way that you associate a tracking number independent of making changes to the other ones and be able to generate business value in that component.
Great point.
Question or slight observation. If this is too detailed, just tell me to wait. It's totally fine. So when I see this, I'm thinking, and yeah, this almost looks like I'm imagining data workflow. In order to break like a data workflow down into different components, for example, and develop maybe ingestion versus certain level of processing versus exposure to end-to-end user, it feels like it would require some level of higher level architecture predefined before you're able to break that thing down and develop chunks that can still link back together and be tested end to end at the end. So at what point does one define like the granularity of design architecture, which sounds a little bit more waterflow-ish and waterfall-ish prior to breaking something down and actually building it? Whereas it seems like you would want to try to be able to develop each of these like as self-contained as possible, but it would still require the full workflow architecture to be understood, right? Is that accurate?
So, I think I kind of get it. So you're asking if there is a workflow, how, and everything has to be present in order for it to work?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so like if end to end, do you still have to understand the big picture overall prior to splitting it out and actually building the individual components?
Andrew, do you have a specific example you can share?
I'm just thinking of like a data flow pipeline. So files are going to come in from a third party. They have to be both landed somewhere internally and then ingested into a particular data warehousing system, processed potentially multiple times, and then eventually exposed to an end user and then included in some reporting. So it's like that, thinking of that as a whole workflow. And then trying to split that down, it still feels like you would need some level of high-level architecture defined so that once you split it into smaller pieces, that those pieces actually work together efficiently. I'm just trying to think of like how to split things down. If that's too granular, which it sounds like it is, I will wait until afterward.
I think it might be useful to think in terms of this technique for splitting based on workflow steps is looking at it not in terms of a formal workflow in a system. It's more in terms of the general flow of work, like the sequence of things that has to happen. You shouldn't put a tracking number on the box till after you've selected the box and put stuff in it. You shouldn't put it on the truck until after you've done those things. So it's more looking at what's the series of activities and what's their logical sequencing, and less the formal definition of a workflow.
Okay.
This is really asking, are there discrete activities that have a degree of logical sequence to them? In the case of what you're talking about, there are get the data, transform the data, expose the data are logical ones. The question you're asking about, do you actually need to drive down to the specifics of the workflow and the architecture of the system? Generally, you should try and defer that as long as you can, so that you're able to understand the needs before you start building. But you are going to hit a point where you say, we actually have to make decisions about how stuff moves. This technique, however, is useful even before you've made the specific decisions, because it's just looking at the flow of cause and effect, the arrow of time, and other discrete logical steps. Does that help?
Yeah, it almost sounds like it's more the business architecture workflow,
Much
like the
more
business
business.
process too, and breaking that down versus the, okay, yeah, makes sense. Thanks.
Great. Another way to split stories is by business role. So if there are multiple business roles in a story, can you split those up into their own individual story or individual task? So, for example, don't ship oversized items to PO boxes. So there's a couple different business rules in here. One, what is the logic that defines an oversized item? Then, what do we tell the customer when they have an oversized item in their cart? And then, what other functionality is behind that? So, for example, you could split it up into logic to detect oversized items, message alerting the user to remove the oversized item, and then inactivate the place order button until the item is removed. Great. Another way to split stories is using a happy/unhappy workflow. So what is the positive scenario and what is the negative test case scenario? So if the story is lock the user out if they enter a password wrong 5 times, we can split it up into, say they enter it correctly the first time. So they proceed as they normally would. If they enter it incorrectly 5 times because they have caps on, then you'll give them a message that they're locked out. And then from there, you can send in emails telling them how to reset their password if they click a particular link. And so can you guys see how locking out a user after the 5th time that they've entered their password incorrectly can be kind of split into different components? Questions, comments, concerns so far? No? Okay.
Does anybody online have questions? Say no.
No. Okay. Input options is also another way to split stories. So are there multiple ways for the end user to access the functionality that you're developing? So for instance, on fingerhut.com, we display the homepage differently if you're on a different device. So if you're on a desktop, it's different from a tablet, which is different from your iPhone. So if you're on your desktop site, you see the full-blown site. If you're on the tablet, maybe you'll see the responsive version. If you're on your iPhone, you'll see the Move website. So it's displaying the homepage to users on fingerhut.com can be split into different tasks based on the device in which they're using.
You could also look at another scenario if you were to talk about if you wanted to display a message to users, like warning them that one more wrong password attempt will lock them out. The way that you display that would be different. If you were doing it on a page that was pure HTML, you could display it inline of the page. If you were dealing with a native app, you might choose to display that as actually an alert message that pops up over the application itself. So different ways to reach the user depending on the context.
Another way to split stories is operation. So anytime you really see the word manage, it really means kind of 4 different things. Either adding something, updating something, deleting something, actually 3. Adding, update, deleting. So if you have a story of managing shipping address, you can add a new shipping address, you can delete your non-primary shipping address, or you can update any of your shipping addresses. So those are 3 discrete different things that you can develop against. And also with these minimal viable products, you're going to have to do a little bit of prioritization. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to delete the shipping address if you don't even allow them to add a shipping address. Likewise, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to edit a shipping address if you don't even allow them to add a shipping address. So data and parameters is a different way to also split up user stories. So is there a logical breakpoint in which you displayed, your story will behave differently based on different data points? This isn't an actual example, but I have seen sites where you, based on the number of search results you get a different view of it. So if there are less than 25 results, you see it in one view. If you see it, if there's a boatload of search results, you see it in a different view. If there's 0 search results, you get a no images found, or blank search results page. So another easy way to think of this is like, if you are going to buy liquor at Target, so if you're under 21, whenever the cashier enters their information, it's like, oh, no, you can't sell it to them. If they're over 21, they go straight through. If they don't even have an ID, sorry, you don't even enter the address, or enter the birth date at that point. Can anybody think of any other data types or parameters that they've used to break up a story?
Google does this with, Google supports search by image, for example. So you can actually have different input types. So if you give Google a text string, it'll search for that text. Google also does some stuff where it parses the text string and says, okay, what do you mean? If you put in, 10x12, it'll bring back and says 10 times 12 is 120. So it'll actually, so it's looking at the data input and behaving differently based on the input data string depending on various things.
Right. So yet another way to split stories is using test cases or acceptance criteria. So this is slightly different from the happy/unhappy flow. It's what tests are going to be written for it. So if you have a story of allowing the user to make a payment towards their account, based on the payment that the user is trying to make compared to their current account balance, it's going to behave differently. So if your payment is less than your account balance, it goes through perfectly fine. If it's more than their account balance, well, it'd be nice if we could keep some of their money, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So we don't allow the payment there, and then if they don't have an account balance, it behaves differently also. So these are different test cases in which QA would write, and so that's kind of a logical way to break them up into stories also. Now you can try. Great, and so a little bit of background. So we have a business requirements document for a word processing tool that Bluestem wants to implement. And so that'll be your staples handout here. The real meat of it is going to be pages 7 and 8. So let's number off by 4s. Yeah. So, Aaron, do you want to start?
1,
2,
3,
4,
1,
3, 4,
1.
2, 3, 4.
Okay.
What, Brian?
Hey,
Come
No,
on,
sorry, I have some
man.
training I need to get to a little
Hey.
bit here.
Okay, and then those on the phone will be their own group. So I think we can mute the mics, or sorry, mute the speakers, and then they can talk amongst themselves on the conference line.
You guys want to do that?
Gopal, Anastasia,
They're all on
Vinya,
mute.
And a boss,
the
right?
boss.
There are 4 of you. Great.
Okay.
All right.
If you guys want to start talking real quick, okay, I guess I can finish this up too. So what I want your groups to do, and I'll get you the flip charts, is to come up with at least 1 theme, 2 epics, 10 stories, and then 10 tasks. So there's definitely no concrete way to do this. So we're all going to have different viewpoints, but just try your best.
Yeah, to be clear, like, there's not a right way, you know, just what we're looking to do out of this exercise is like, have the groups break up and then let's share what everybody comes back with and how you guys got there. Cool, okay. So, 1, 2, 3, 4?
Yes.
Okay.
Might do some switching around of people's too.
Yes, go ahead and switch people's around.
Okay.
I think
One's over there, two's over there, 3 and 4. So those on the phone, you guys can unmute yourselves and talk amongst yourselves.
Do you want me to pause this?
Yeah,
Yep.
that'd be great.
Got no seat.